as I understand.
Welcome back to Law News Network, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us. We are cutting out of that prior testimony in the Jessica Chambers case because we want to analyze a little bit what's going on today and what's been happening in this case. Again, the jury is on a site visit right now. We want to talk a little bit about what's happening there. So lucky for us, we have our senior trial producer from LawNewz, Cathy Russon. Cathy, great to see you again, and thanks for joining us here.
Good to see you too, Jesse.
Cathy, let's talk a little bit about this site view. I know that you are getting updates about what's happening there. Can you speak a little bit about what the jury's seeing, what they're hearing, what they're able to do, what they're not able to do? We obviously don't have a feed to see what's happening, but you do have updates. So we'd love to hear what's happening.
Yes, so we are getting a play-by-play. We do have a person that's in the media line following the jury around. They're not allowed to get out of their cars with electronics, so I have her staying in the car just so everyone knows we're not violating any orders, and texting me information about what's happening. So they just finished at the Justice Complex impound yard where Jessica's car has been. So the jury just got to see that burned out car up close, which I'm sure was shocking. I can only imagine knowing what happened to her, and now they see that car that is just fried. There's nothing left of that car. They can walk around it. They can't touch it. That's what we know from other jury views, is they can't touch evidence like that while they're out on a jury view, or they can't, obviously in this case they wouldn't want to get in, but things like that in other jury views, jurors cannot do. Well, the information I have is that the jurors had no questions, so I guess they are going to be allowed to ask questions. This is the prosecution's case, that we're in their case in chief, so they're presenting each spot to the jury as if, just like they have a witness on the stand. So they talked at the first scene, the jury had no questions, and the defense had nothing to say, and now they're on their way to scene number 2, which we're not exactly sure what that is, but I'll have that information shortly.
I wonder what questions would be like at this site visit. I wonder what you would be able to ask. I mean, we just were showing some pictures. That is a charred car. It shows the nature of what was going on, and we're not even entirely clear, because no one was present, how long Jessica Chambers was actually in that car and how long she was on fire. It just shows the nature of this gruesome attack. Cathy, let's talk a little bit about why is this important for a jury to see this site view. They're looking at the different sites, they're looking at her car, they're going to be looking at the gas station where Jessica Chambers was, they're going to be looking at the crime scene. How important is it for a jury, especially in light of this case?
Oh, in this case, I think it's crucial. We do see jury views in a lot of trials. We also see judges deny jury views, because almost every trial, the prosecution, sometimes the defense, wants the jury to go out and see the areas. And sometimes it's just not going to be probative. They were not going to get much out of it, so the judge doesn't allow it, or there's already surveillance cameras on the scene, whatever. In this case, they've already heard testimony about where she was that day, what she had done, about what we know at least, and where she ended up, where her car ended up, where her body ended up when she was walking out, and where her keys ended up. Also, we've heard testimony about Quentin Tellis's house. It's directly across the street from the gas station, which is just down the road from where she was found. So they're going to now get to see all of that. Remember, they're not from this area. So Cortland is very small. It's like 1 square mile, maybe 500-600 people, very small. The jury couldn't have come from that area. That's why they went 200 miles away and got an area, because everybody knows everybody. So they went 200 miles away, got a jury, and that's who this jury is. So they don't know the area, presumably. And that's why this is important for them to see each stop of the way that Jessica took.
And as you just said, because this case is so important in timeline, the proximity by his house to the gas station to where the crime took place, it's all so close. So the jury could conceive of the idea that if Quentin Tellis is the one who did this, then yes, he parked the car, took the keys, threw them out, ran to his sister's house, got her car, went back to his house, got the gas canister, and came back and burned Jessica. You can make sense of the fact of that timeline, and you've been listening just as we've been listening. What do you make of that timeline that the prosecution's putting forth? Because the defense is saying, well, you know what, he wasn't anywhere near this, he was going to get a prepaid debit card. Well, the prosecution's saying he did that after. What do you make of that timeline? Because it's so important for the prosecution.
Okay, so I'm going to go over this again. I was on with Misty yesterday, and I went over my notes on the exact times and things that we know has come out in court so far.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So these are my notes from the openings and from testimony so far. Jessica picked up Quentin earlier in the day, and they went and picked up her friend Keisha, and that Keisha also testified, and they drove around for an hour or two, and then Quentin was dropped back off first, then Keisha, then Jessica went home. Her mother said Jessica took a nap and was woken up by a phone call. Then Jessica left the house around a little after 5, and she picked up Quentin Tellis at 5:30, and they went to a Taco Bell. At 6:48, Jessica calls her mom just to check in and say she'll be home in a little while. Her mom testified that anytime Jessica calls her when she's out and about in her cars, there's always music pounding in the background, and this time it was quiet, and that led Jessica's mom to believe somebody was with her. But at 6:48, we know that Quentin was with her, at least because he admits to that. Quentin tells police that Jessica, this is after he finally admitted to being with her, because that wasn't his first story, but he tells police that Jessica dropped him off at 7 p.m. Okay? At 7:42, Quentin calls Jessica's phone and then sends a text that says, "Honey, sorry I can't be with you tonight," and says he can't see her because his girlfriend was coming up. That was at 7:42. He makes this text and call. Didn't get Jessica, but this was he attempted call. Now we'll see the phone records. This comes from opening statements. Okay. Then at 7. Let's see. After he says, "I can't see you, my girlfriend's coming up," after that, Quentin Tellis makes a call to his girlfriend. So prosecutors are saying, or at least alluding to the fact that he made the call afterwards and said, "Honey, come up," so it was padding his alibi. So that's what they're trying to say with that. Then at 7:50 p.m., so for 7:42, he calls her phone. At 7:50, a car pulls into his driveway up to the shed. And we're going to see that surveillance video because he lives across the street from that convenience store that has a camera pointing toward where he lives. A car pulls in and pulls up to the shed. When Quentin Tellis was asked about that shed, he said he keeps a dirt bike in there and that he has gas in there. At 8:09, the 911 call comes in. So that's what we know.
Cathy, let's break that down a little bit. Okay, I want to start from the beginning of that. This is so helpful. Keisha testified that when she saw Quentin say goodbye to Jessica, the way he hugged her, something didn't seem right. Something, and that is something that is important here, because you just heard as you were explaining, when things don't seem right, there might be a reason to it. Her mother testified to the fact there was no music going on, which is what was normally happening. You would assume that she was with Quentin, and as Quentin has said in the past, he had sex with Jessica, said they reclined the seat backwards, and when the investigators found her car burned, the seat was backwards. So you can kind of see what's happening a little bit. Let's break down a little bit Keisha's testimony about her saying that something didn't seem right between the two of them, and then the fact that he was with her and that they had sex. What do you make about this?
First of all, I was shocked that the defense didn't object. Keisha was allowed to say Jessica seemed like she was scared or that she was uncomfortable. She kept saying what Jessica seemed like to her. Now, I kept waiting for the defense to object, and they didn't. And so she got in the fact that she believes Jessica was scared of Quentin. Although, I don't know if that's come up to Keisha's mind after the fact, because they were hanging out and driving around for an hour or two, and then she said goodbye to him in front of her. So I don't know why she would act scared at that point. But that was able to come out in front of this jury. For me, that's huge, because then Jessica ends up dead that night.
Right, and again, like you said, we don't know if she came to that theory after the case, because how many times do we see when somebody is on the stand, when somebody is on trial, man, they look a lot more guilty than before they did. So everybody's starting to pile up and pile up and pile up. And let's break it down a little bit more on that timeline, okay? So now we know that, first of all, let's remind our viewers, Quentin Tellis lied in the beginning. He said he was only with Jessica in the morning. Then after further pressure, he said, okay, I was with her later in the night, I was with her here, I was with her there. He said he had sex with her. Now you're starting to see, okay, This was a guy that was with her a very short time before the 911 call, okay? Who else could have came in this point and done this? And wouldn't you think that if he was with her at such a short amount of time beforehand, if he didn't do it, he might have seen someone that did? Something's not adding up.
By his admission, he was dropped off 1 hour before the 911 call came in, by his admission. So what happened in that 1 hour, if he's telling the truth and she drops him off and leaves, where does she go that gets her killed, and killed in such a horrific way? You know, this is a very personal thing to do. The prosecutor, as you stated earlier, has said that they believe, which also I can't believe wasn't objected to, but he said that he believes that she was smothered and that Tellis thought she was dead and then lit the car on fire to get rid of the evidence. Mm-hmm. So if that's true, then I guess they don't believe that Tellis or whoever did this was trying to torture her on top of everything else by lighting her on fire.
And as we mentioned,
it's interesting because all along for years now, we've heard that she was lit on fire, she was tortured, you know, all this stuff. Even the prosecution is saying they don't believe that.
Well, it's important because, again, he was charged with capital murder here, meaning that the crime really here is third-degree arson, okay? But what's important to note is it doesn't matter if he intended to kill her. If her death resulted as a result of that arson, he's going away. He's convicted. That's the point here. It's not a first-degree murder charge where you have to show that he premeditated, there was intent. No, he committed the arson, she died, he's done for. So the important thing to point out here also is, so we got the shed where he keeps the gas. He lives right across the street from the gas station. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Cathy, if in that video, when you look at her, doesn't she wave to somebody?
She absolutely waves to someone and heads toward them. Then comes back on scene in the front of the camera a few minutes later and goes in the store. So she absolutely sees somebody. Now, everyone knows everyone in that town.
Yep.
So we don't, I don't know how much to read into that, but that certainly happened.
Right. And then his fingerprints are found on the car keys, all right? Then you see the car moving out of his house. It's a circumstantial case, but the prosecution would be laying out pretty strongly that there was activity going on at his house, and he was somehow involved in the proximity and the time frame of when this crime occurred. But the defense, what do they need to do? Do they just rely on the Eric and the Derek comments that were made by, or allegedly by, Jessica Chambers? Is that what they heard? Do they just strike up that she said Eric or Derek? That's what we need to focus on, and everything else is circumstantial, and you can't convict him based upon that?
Look, I think this is a great circumstantial case from the prosecution point of view. I think that they can place him in the area. He was the last one with her. His DNA is on the keys. He lied about it. The phone records are going to show him right there in the area. He admits to having sex with her right before that, and then she ends up burned to death in panties only. Okay, so I think it's a great circumstantial case for prosecution until Jessica tells them who did this to her. And for me, that's a problem for the state. And that's the best thing. That's the best thing the defense has. That's why their opening statement was 10 minutes. Because they're like, look, she told everyone who did this to her. And it wasn't my client. And then the prosecution, I mean, maybe they're trying to head off the defense doing it, but they brought up witness after witness after, I don't know if it was like 8 witnesses or 9 witnesses, over and over and over again, and asked them, who did she say did it? And they said Eric. Over and over and over and over and over. Like they were planting in the jury's head. Now, later on, they're going to say more about that, I'm sure. But I do have, I have a problem. When the case first started and throughout the years, we've heard that she uttered Eric or Derek, and that the prosecution is saying her esophagus and tongue was so burnt that it was difficult for her to even say anything. But now we've had 8 or 9 witnesses come up that says that she said Jessica. She was able to say Jessica. Only one witness said he thought he heard several other names first, like Katina and Katrina, and I don't even know. But he didn't say that in his initial statement, by the way. The defense showed him his initial statement. And everyone else said she said Jessica. One thought she said Jessica Chambers, but she still said Jessica. So she's able to say that. They all testified that she was saying, I'm cold, I'm cold. She's able to say that. And that she was thirsty. She's able to say that. She talked to 8 or 9 different people. She wasn't going in and out of consciousness, which is amazing. I mean, what this girl went through, first up, man, I can't, it's incredible the fight she had in her, in my opinion. But she was able to speak to all those people. And she's able to say Eric over and over and over again. And when asked, what's Eric's last name? She says, I don't know. So this is a problem for the state, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to get slammed by all the trial watchers because a majority of them have him guilty and just dead to rights on this, and they can make up reasons why she's saying Eric, but I think it's a big problem for the state.
Cathy, I agree with you. I think that that's the problem, is that if she was able to say other things and she was able to clearly articulate what was going on and what she needed at certain other points, then why couldn't she properly say Quentin or Tellis? That's the issue. That's the problem. Then again, we will be probably hearing experts later on testifying to the fact that due to the nature of her injuries, some things that she communicated didn't come out particularly clear, or it's possible that, and I've heard this too, that when plastic in the car burns, it creates a hallucinatory effect in the mind. It creates a shock in the mind, and you might not be saying things as correctly as you want them to when you inhale those plastics. I'm curious if we hear testimony about that, but as I said, the Eric or the Derek is very crucial. And what I've heard Prosecutor John Champion say is that they've investigated every Eric or Derek in the community. That's how they started this investigation, and none of them panned out. When we had David DiPietro on earlier, I said to him as a defense attorney, would you bring up the lead investigator and question him about every Eric or Derek and why none of those worked out well? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, okay, so we didn't go into a lot of this. I was on with Misty yesterday, and I thought about bringing it up, but I guess we'll talk about it now because we don't have a lot of information and there's just a lot of chatter out in social media, but we do know a few things. We know that Quentin Tellis's wife, because he did marry that girlfriend after this, her cousin's name is Eric Hill. He also was dating Quentin Tellis's sister, so they were definitely buddies. And there's an Eric right there, that's right there in that town, that's friends with Quentin Tellis. Then his name comes up in the Louisiana investigation. So we all know now that Quentin Tellis is charged in the murder of a woman in Louisiana, just days after he moves there with his wife, which is months after Jessica, and that she was stabbed 30 times. Prosecutors say he did it to get her debit card and PIN number to steal money. Now, Eric Hill has spoken with police on that case, and at first he tried to cover for Quentin, and then he finally said, okay, yes, Quentin admitted to me to doing that. So his name definitely comes up in Quentin Tellis's life, and his name is Eric. So people are running rampant with that. What I don't know, and I have been able to find out, and I've asked several people that have been covering this case for a long time, is what was Eric Hill's alibi, and how much was he investigated? Nobody really knows that I can find.
That is so disturbing because, look, the argument against that would be she's known him for 2 weeks. What's the chances she met an Eric Hill? You know, met his girlfriend's cousin. Okay, yeah, his girlfriend's cousin. That could be the argument. Then again, you have an Eric that's directly tied to Quentin Tellis and tied to the other murder charge that he's involved in. I hope we hear something about this in this case. I'm curious. If you are the prosecution, as they've been putting forward, we know you're going to hear this Eric and Derek, so we're going to put forth witnesses that talk about that. Would they get out of the way an Eric Hill? Do you think that they would talk about that when they have lead investigators on the stand? Or are we going to see the defense bring it up? Because they really should bring that up. Or alternatively, Cathy, I'm going to give you another idea. What I've heard about Eric Hill and Quentin Tellis is that they exchanged war stories. You know, this is what I did, this is what you did. Is it possible that Quentin Tellis somehow has a relationship with Eric Hill and might be, you know, taking the blame for this? And maybe he told his attorneys, listen, you defend me, don't worry about Eric Hill. But I don't know, I'm just speculating here. But then again, I would imagine if an Eric Hill who's directly tied to this has a relationship, you'd have to hear about it in this case. But I'm curious what you think.
Okay, so a few things. First of all, our awesome trial coordinator, Stephen, is bringing up that Jessica's friend Keisha testified on the stand that Jessica sold marijuana several times a week. And that this could, and so we could infer from that that this could have been a drug deal gone bad. All right. And Eric Hill, I believe, don't quote me, is also into the drug scene. Okay. So I think they all were, quite frankly. But so there, that could be the connection there. Now, I would assume that Eric Hill was investigated thoroughly because they were trying to solve this case. They were trying to solve this case for a long time, and they knew she had said the name Eric. And so what was reported is they interviewed and investigated every single Eric or Derek in the whole whatever miles and miles radius, trying to find the guy that did this. So hopefully the prosecution is going to be able to say, now they're not going to bring him up, right? They're not going to say anything probably until the defense brings him up. And then I would assume the defense, I don't know. Will the defense bring him up? He's the guy's wife's cousin. I don't know if they're going to bring up the name Eric Hill. So it'll be interesting to see if he even comes up in trial at all, because the defense may not want to point the finger right at him by even bringing up an alternate person. And the state probably doesn't want to try and explain anything until they have to. I don't know how that will pan out, actually. Now,
oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, someone else sent me a message. Like I said, now you have to remember, social media sleuths were all over this case for years, and they had everyone and their dog guilty. Everyone was guilty. They harassed family members. They were relentless trying to find out who killed Jessica Chambers. So there's a lot of scuttlebutt out there. There's a lot of talk, and a lot of it's not true. Somebody mentioned in our chat room that could it be that we know Quentin Tellis had a girlfriend, and we know he was seeing Jessica Chambers. So from that, we know he was cheating on his girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And the girlfriend's cousin is Eric Hill. So did he try and get retribution for the girlfriend? That was brought up.
Yeah, we're not speculating. I mean, we are speculating, but it's a very viable theory when you think about it. And the problem that I have with it, I'm not an investigator. I'm not a police officer. I don't know what it means to clear someone from a crime. You know, you investigate people and they said they have nothing to do with it. It's very easy to say that. But if they did investigate Eric Hill, as you said, what was his alibi? How did they investigate him? What was the process? Because if they didn't fully vet this guy at all, or they did, I think we have a right to know. And I think that the jury has a right to know. And I would hope someone, either the prosecution or the defense, brings this up, because it really is an issue. I mean, how often do you have a victim, a deceased victim, who's able to identify who their killer is? And I'm sure the prosecution will go forward trying to say, well, you know, we have experts on the stand that can speak to burn damage, and a Quentin can sound like or Quentin or Tellis can sound like an Eric. That's all well and good. You can try and do that. But the stronger thing is to disprove who all the other Erics are in this case. You know, the defense hasn't done much. What do you expect their defense to be moving forward if it's not just relying on Eric and Derek? Do they talk about a botched investigation? What would you imagine them doing, Cathy?
Well, okay, you remember in the Zach Adams Holly Bobo case, the defense pointed fingers at Terry Britt. They pointed fingers at somebody else and gave all the reasons why he could have been the one that killed Holly Bobo. So we know, you know, it can be done, and the defense could do that. I wonder if it's a problem because the person they would point the fingers at is a family member of Quentin Tellis's. I don't know if that's a problem. And by the way, he has family members in court every day. And every day he's turning and smiling at them and waving at them. And there's actually a fairly good number of people there on his side of the court. So I don't know. The jury right now, okay, that jury right now has never, presumably, heard the name Eric Hill. They don't have any idea. So does the state need to explain him when the jury doesn't know anything about him? Because why bring that up? And so I would assume the defense would need to go at him. But again, it's a family member. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know because they're going to say, look, it's not our job to prove this case. And she said Eric did it, and that's not my client's name. And they could put on a very bare bones case like that. And, you know, that might be successful. We have yet to see the cell phone evidence. Now, the defense says that it's not accurate. and not reliable. We have to remember, very, very small town. So what do they have? Like one cell tower for everyone to hit off of? I mean, I don't know. So it might not be as accurate as we have seen in other cases.
Let's talk
That'll
about.
be interesting.
Oh, I'm sorry, Cathy. Yeah, please
No, you're
continue.
good.
No, I was going to say that this investigation, it took so long to get to Quentin Tellis. They initially investigated him. What my understanding was from the prosecution's opening arguments was they investigated him, he checked out, they did a further investigation, and it was only until a change in the software or some change in the cell phone evidence that they were able to track him. Maybe you could speak a little bit more about it. Why did this take so long to get to Quentin when they initially interviewed him and he checked out? Then they got him. I mean, if you're talking about from a defense point of view that there's some issue with the investigators in this case not properly investigating, and we just heard one of the investigators on the scene who disregarded lighters because they were rusty. Said even if we put them into evidence, I know they had nothing to do with it. What? What do you think about this?
Now, car fire, woman on fire, lighters at the scene. It seems pretty relevant to pick them up and test them. They did say they were rusted, so they didn't think they had anything to do with it. I just want to quickly say we have the next update. The jury is at stop number 2, which is at the scene of the fire. So that's where they are now. Which, well, you know, they're going to be able to now see what they just saw pictures of. They've seen pictures of the area. Now they're going to be able to, this is so important, Jesse, right, for a jury to get out and walk around the last steps that Jessica Chambers took and to get that in their mind. This is why the jury view is so important. So they can see where she was coming out of the woods, is how it was described, and how far away from her car she was when first responders got on. She was walking toward them. And then they're also going to be able to see the ditch where her keys were, how far away that is. The testimony was about 1/8 of a mile.
Yeah.
So right there, you know. Okay, so that's where they are now. I forgot what your question was.
No, my question was basically, that's all good to know, and especially I hope they see how far away those car keys were with Quentin Tellis' DNA on them from the actual crime scene. And remember, Jessica Chambers, when firefighters came forward, she was walking towards them. She was able to get out of the car and walk around, and hopefully she was able to put some of that fire out, because you can only imagine, as you said, what pain she was in. It's so hard to even fathom it. But what we were talking about was this idea of why did they get Quentin Tellis? I mean, they first interviewed him, couldn't find anything. There was an update, something, and maybe the cell phone evidence that they were able to actually track him. And let's not forget, we were just talking that at that crime scene, one of the investigators says, I'm going to disregard the lighters and they're rusty. This smells of a botched investigation in a way, and if the data that they've used isn't reliable, the defense is going to pick on that. I just have an overall large question about this investigation, why it took so long, are there evidence that it was botched, and how did they get Quentin Tellis after they initially said he was okay? So what do you make of all this, Cathy?
Well, what we know is he finally came back on their radar after the Louisiana murder. And when they were investigating his cell phone, I don't know why this wasn't done before, but when they were investigating his cell phone information in the Louisiana murder, that's how they say they finally saw the ties to Jessica. And he was arrested right after that. He was arrested on Louisiana and arrested for Jessica's murder. So something clicked at that moment, and apparently it's phone records. But how they weren't pulled before, I don't know. This didn't happen in 1999, so I don't really know why they didn't have all of his cell records and be able to have the same information then when it happened that they got later after Louisiana. But that apparently is when the tie was made for everybody, and he was arrested right after that, and it has to do with phone records.
Cathy, the whole thing is we want answers in this kind of gruesome crime, and hopefully we get some more answers. We are only on the 3rd day of this trial. They are going on a site visit. Cathy, thank you so much for providing some insight into this case for us and providing a great timeline so now the viewers can understand exactly what the prosecution's roadmap is to convict Quentin Tellis. And hopefully we get some more explanation about this Eric Hill character, and hopefully that's explained away too. But Cathy, thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to have you back on to talk more about this.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.